Hi everyone, it's Phil here from Ashland Leather, and I've got some really incredible leather to show you today. We're going to be comparing some deerskin versus horsehide versus bovine, and they're all very different. None of them are necessarily better or worse than the other, but they all have very unique characteristics, and I'd like to show you all about it. And look at this fat Herbie here in this brand new tumbled deerskin from Horween Leather. This is actually a trial that they ran on some deerskins that they do not plan to run again. We did make some special private stock wallets out of them that turned out great, and you can see all the depth of color in this tumbled derby deerskin. That's a little bit of a tongue twister. You can see all the little bits of texture difference as well. A lot of people, when they think about deerskin, you actually think about a very soft leather that might be appropriate for something like a glove. Very, very soft and comfortable, but you can tan that deerskin in different ways. That's what the derby is here. Very unique look, very intense grain character. So let me take you downstairs. We're going to compare the characteristics of all these different types of hides. And then after that, we'll do a little bit of a macro shot, get a close in, zoomed in look at the grain characters themselves. All right, let's look at some leather. I've laid out on the table here from smallest to largest. The top skin here, this is actually calfskin. You can see it's much smaller than everything else underneath it on the table. This is actually an old calfskin that was tanned in 1941 that the tannery was never able to reproduce. And the thing I want you to observe about the calfskin is the size of it. The area is very, very small. So large pattern pieces are not possible to be made out of these skins. And the leather is also quite thin. The calf that we have here is about 3 to 4 ounces thick. Now let's take a little bit of a closer look at the grain character. The thing that people love about calfskin is a very, very tight break. So as you flex this leather and fold it in on itself, this break right here, the creasing and delamination is very, very tight. It's almost like a sugary looking break on this leather right here that you can see inside of the fold there. Very, very tight on the calfskin. And on these particular calfskins, we've got some really interesting striations down the backbone of the animal. And the next one that we're going to look at here is a deerskin. You can see this is a little bit larger. The deerskins tend to be around 12 to 13 square feet, but that is very, very highly dependent upon the animal itself. And from the batch that Horween tanned here, they're all around 12, 11, 13 square feet. And the most notable thing to talk about on the deerskin are the grain selections. So this tannage here is Horween's derby leather, which is a tannage that is designed to accentuate the character of the grain. There's also these little small oval shapes that you might be able to see here. That's little bits of imperfections in the animal skin itself. And what I'm talking about here are these little ovals. They're kind of hard to see. And all these little bits of selection issues in the skin are all very random. It's not gonna hurt a product. It's not gonna break or anything like that. It's certainly just a cosmetic issue. But if you're a manufacturer trying to make a ton of different products, you're not gonna be able to deal with this amount of variance. But the derby tannage here on this deerskin is very special. It's like really great randomized tumbled look with all these bits of highs and lows and colors, and a little bit of that pebble pattern happening there. And I think the interesting thing is when you tell people you have something made out of deerskin, I think they immediately think of something very, very soft, something that you might use for a glove. That is actually not because of the deerskin, that's because of the tannage. So you can do something almost opposite of that, like this derby here. This tannage is more of a veg tan and it's firmer, but it also has a wax finish on the surface. So you don't get that same softness as you do on a glove tannage on a deerskin. And the other really cool thing is if you look very closely at the grain, the hair holes themselves are very, very coarse, and it's much, much less refined than the calf. And it's even less refined than the horsehide too. But the cleanest grains of them all tend to be the steer. Next up, let's look at a horsehide. We've got 4 different segments of hide here to look at. The teal section on the top, that is what we call the horse front. That's everything above the waist towards the head of the animal or towards the neck of the animal. This is the horse butt strip here, which is the area that is found just above the shell cordovan. And then these 2 oval shapes on the bottom, these are pieces of shell cordovan. So let's break these down by one. You can see the horse mane down the center. That's something that is very characteristic on the horses. You're always going to see that. And the farther it goes up, the more coarse this hair pattern gets. Very, very interesting. You'll also notice on this specific horsehide, the grain clarity is very low. There's lots of random imperfections. This is very much an aniline finish leather, so you could hide a lot of that by increasing the amount of finish and just covering up more of these imperfections. Like you see here, little bits of scratching in the grain. The other thing to notice about the horse fronts is they're also very, very thin. It's interesting because the horse fronts, the area up here, the teal section, this is all roughly like 2 to 3 ounces thick, but the horse butt strip here, this can range in thickness anywhere from down to 4 ounces to even up to like 12 to 15 ounces, depending on the animal. This particular piece here is very, very, very thick, and it's got a really great grain character. We'll go into this in another video, but this is a horse butt strip that was finished just like shell cordovan. And the bottom here, these 2 oval shapes, this also ranges in thickness. And you might imagine the same thing happens here. As we go from the center of the animal to the outside, it tends to get thinner and drop off in weight towards the edge and the back of the animal. So a little bit thicker on the top sections of the shell here, and they tend to be a little bit thinner down on the bottom. And it's also the same on the right side here. Got some really beautiful pieces of garnet shell cordovan here to show you alongside of this colorate shell cordovan horse butt strip. And this is the teal horsehide latigo. And last but very much not least, this is a steer hide, and this is a side of leather. A lot of tanneries will actually make 2 sides of leather. That's called a whole hide. At Horween, they only produce sides, which is an animal that has been cut down the backbone, or the skin has been cut down the backbone. So we're seeing the backbone across the top section here. This area here on the back is known as the butt. This is the back leg. We've got the belly down here. Here's the front leg. We also have the neck and the shoulder of the animal. If you were to crop off the shoulder and the belly of the animal, this is an area here that is called the bend. And this right here would be called a single bend. If it was a whole hide and you had 2 of these bends put together, it's called a double bend. That's the best area of the skin to make just about everything. It tends to be tightest, tends to be the cleanest grains, really special. It's like the perfect pieces of the hide. And on this specific side here, this is 8 to 9 ounce. This is our belt weight thickness English tan Dublin. And the thicker the hide gets, the more of these fat wrinkles and draw that you tend to see in the skin. So fat wrinkles are perpendicular to the backbone. That's what these are called here. And the draw is parallel to the backbone. That's what's on the bottom here. I actually really love the look of it, but it's not something that you can reproduce or prescribe from a tannery. They cannot control the amount of draw here on a tannage like the English tan Dublin. The most important thing to know about the steer hides, number 1, the grains tend to be the clearest and the best grains compared to something like a horse hide or deer hide. There tend to be less scratches and healed scars on the steer hides. You can see a couple of them here in this skin, which is notable, but this is about as good as it gets for selections on a steer hide. And there's 2 more things to know about steer hides or bovine hides that are very critical to know. We're looking at a specific steer hide here, and steer hides, especially the jumbo steer hides, are the only types of bovine that can get thick enough to make an unlined belt like this 8 to 9 ounce thick Dublin here. A lot of people call the animal here a cow, but the cow hides are very specific. They tend to have larger bellies on the bottom because they do have babies. So those fibers tend to stretch out, become a little bit looser, and they get a little bit bigger down here. And the other thing is that the cow hides tend to be very, very thin all over, especially when compared to a steer hide here. So it's very important to choose steer hides if you need a thicker piece of leather, something like a boot that's maybe 6 ounces, 7 ounces in some cases. You can only make those on steer hides. Where something like a cowhide, the animal actually lives a little bit longer, so you will get less clear grain. You will get more scratches and scars because the animal has lived longer and has had more opportunity to scratch itself up. But on the steer hides here, these are raised for meat, and they tend to be raised as fast as possible. So they tend to not have as many scratches and scuffs and scars. So the grains tend to be much clearer on the steer hides, especially when compared to deer, which is very low grain clarity, or even the horse hides tend to be very low grain clarity also. All right, we're back upstairs. Let's take a little bit of a zoomed in look here at this derby deerskin. Look very carefully at the character of the grain holes on this. On the deerskin, it's very, very intense grain, very, very coarse as well. It might be a little bit hard to see what I'm talking about with the grain character because of the tumbled pattern from the tannage here and the finishing. But look down the spine here, these very, very small hair holes. And I'll try to get an even closer look here to show you. Look at the very small hair holes. And that's a very, very coarse look on the deer skin. Now, if we compare that to the horse front, this is also a Dublin tannage. So it should be a decent apples to apples comparison here. But look at the grain character on the horse. Also very, very coarse, but it's a little bit more fine than the deer hide. And then Here's a look at the horse butt strip. This is that thicker section that's just north of the shell cordovan. You can see the character of the hair, very, very coarse on this also. It's a little bit less refined. And getting more refined here, this is the calfskin. And look at the hair holes on this guy. It's super, super tight, super, super fine grain. Let's get even closer on this specific one. The hair holes are very, very fine on this calfskin, which is something that is very common for calfskin. That's why a lot of people like it for more dressed up, refined footwear. And just to make sure that we got it here, I'll try to zoom in as close as I can and rock it back and forth in the light. You can see the grain is super, super fine on the calfskin. Now here's the absolute curveball. This is a fat Herbie that I wore for a year that was originally in raw natural shell cordovan. And the reason that this is a curveball is there's no grain at all. So let's go very close, very tight on this guy. You'll notice that there is not any texture at all on this leather. And that's because the cordovan is very unique. It's this dense fiber layer that is only found in the butts of the equine animals. So look very, very closely here. You can see very, very flat and smooth. That's a totally unique look for shell cordovan. You won't see any hair holes at all. So calling this a grain leather is actually incorrect. It's very specifically called shell cordovan for that reason. So to sum it up, bunch of different animals that you can make leather from their skins. And each of them are very, very different. There's not one that's necessarily better than another. They will give you different characteristics or maybe even different price points, because deer skins tend to be rougher and less refined, but they also tend to be less expensive and thinner, so you can't necessarily make a belt out of it. Steer hides tend to be big and thick, so they're going to be a little bit more expensive. Also, the grains are clearer, so you might get a better cutting yield out of it if you're a leather crafter like myself. And if you have any questions about the different leathers and the different types of animal hides here that we looked at in the video, or even other stuff like bison, which I didn't have a full bison hide to show you today, please don't hesitate to leave me a comment. So thanks for checking out the video today. And until next time, I hope you have a good one.